Good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you tonight, May the 3rd. Tomorrow's May the 4th, and we have a lot to talk about tonight. Day 21 of Lori Vallow Daybell's trial. And if you thought that 3.5 weeks into the trial, things would slow down a little bit, there wouldn't be much to talk about, testimony might drag on and on. No, especially not today. Wow, we had quite a revelation, so to speak. I guess you could say. I didn't, tongue in cheek. We had quite a testimony this morning. Audrey Baratario, Lori's friend, was on the stand. Again, we are talking about day 21 of Lori Vallow Daybell's murder trial. Day, 5, 10. We're 3.5 weeks into the testimony, I should say. And then if you want to count the jury selection, that's where we're at tonight. We have a lot to talk about tonight. We are going to talk about Audrey Baratario's testimony, her shocking experience with Lori that I think everybody in the courtroom was stunned and got much pushback from Jim Archibald. We just got the audio in. I'm going to play you the exchange. Tammy's email to her son days after a masked gunman showed up in her driveway. And was it a paintball gun or was it an assault rifle? That was the question during today's hearing. As an assault rifle, an AR, not an AR-15, but I forget an AR 6.5 Grendel. All of you gun people are like, oh man, he doesn't know what he's talking about. You're right, I don't. But they did bring in an assault rifle into the court today. They held it up in front of the jury. Was that shooter a dog thief or a bipolar teen? That was the theory from one of the neighbors. We'll talk about that. And then Ian Pawlowski was on the stand. Melanie Pawlowski's husband. I may have spelled his last name wrong. Let me just look really quick. I apologize if I did. Anyway, then we're going to remember JJ, Tylee, Tammy, and Charles as we talk about this case going forward. This was Audrey Baratario walking into court yesterday. I was standing outside as we were waiting to go into the court. You have to wait outside right before 8 o'clock. And we saw this woman walking in with a security person with an escort. And I was with someone who's followed the case very closely. And I said, who is that? I knew she looked familiar. And she said, that's Audrey Baratario. And this was her on the stand today. And she got emotional at times and shared the encounter that I just referenced. This was Lori, a few different images of Lori. This is the detective from Fremont County who was on the stand, Vince Kayakamanu. Here's the thing. I've worked with Vince for years. I've done stories with him, 15 years ago. And I knew how to say his name then. Kayakamanu. I hope I got it right. He was on the stand again today. He's been on the stand before. He's the one that brought out, the assault rifle right there in a box and held it up and compared it to what a paintball gun would look like. So, yeah, there was a lot of stuff happening today. And then the last 20 minutes or so was Ian Pawlowski. And we're still waiting on the audio for that to come from the courtroom. I was hoping to play some of those clips for you tonight. We don't have the audio, though. It hasn't come in. But there's a great cliffhanger, a great tease about what's going to happen tomorrow. First thing, we know because court had to end a little bit early today in order to prepare for tomorrow. We'll talk about all of that. All right, let's get right to it. Our first witness. By the way, let me know where you're watching from. And if you have any questions, we have a lot on the agenda tonight. So I'll try to get to as many of your questions as I can, depending on how quick I talk and how much we get through. So Audrey, who is Audrey? She is 34, we learned. She's single. She lives in Missouri. She is a friend of Lori's, was involved in the preparing people conferences. She went to these conferences, these spiritual seminars. She actually met Chad and read 3 of his books. And Chad, at the end of 2018, asked Audrey to be Lori's friend. Audrey said that Chad told her that he could not always be with Lori, and so he was hoping Audrey would be Lori's friend. At the time, Audrey was living in Utah, Lori in Arizona. Well, they started communicating, and she would communicate with Chad and she would communicate with Lori. And then one point they got together in a hotel. Audrey and Melanie Gibb and Lori, and Lori mentioned that she needed to do some spiritual work on Charles, her husband, who was alive at the time. Audrey said she met Charles one time, and she met Tammy Daybell one time, and she liked both of them, thought that they were both good people. Well, so all these women are in a hotel room, and Zulema's there too, and they need to do work on Charles to get this evil demon, this evil spirit out of him. And Audrey said on the stand today that she felt really uncomfortable with this. She hadn't heard it before, and she wondered what Lori was talking about. And Lori started talking about knives and fires and weapons. And all of the women in the group were holding hands, and they were each expected to say something when it came to them. This is the castings that we've heard about, casting out of the evil spirits. Audrey said that she felt uncomfortable and did not say anything when it was her turn. She leaves, time goes on, and she ends up moving to Missouri. Now, Latter-day Saints, LDS members, believe that Jesus will, when he returns to earth one day, will come to Missouri. And Audrey prayed and said she felt like she needed to move to Missouri. So she goes to Missouri. She's still in touch with Chad and Lori, and she said that she just didn't feel comfortable 100% with all of these teachings, the light, the dark scale. She didn't remember what number she was on the scale, but she remembered that it was high. She was high. And that law enforcement had low numbers, like Detective Hermosillo and Detective Hope. But she said she was just confused. But she said she has a big heart, she's got an open mind, and she cares about people. Well, Lori and Melanie, her niece, moved to Rexburg. And then in October of 2019, Lori says that she's going to come and visit her friend Audrey with Melanie in Missouri. And they want to go see some history sites from the LDS Church. They went to Adam on Diamond, and then Lori and her niece went to Liberty Jail, and then they went to the temple. And you can look up those sites if you're interested in learning what the historical significance is for them. Well, Melanie and Lori invited Audrey to spend the night in their hotel because she lived quite a distance away. And that night in the hotel, Audrey says that Lori said, Tammy Daybell has an evil spirit. She is possessed. Her spirit is in a cage or in jail, something along those lines. And so she said that they needed to cast out the spirit. They needed to do one of those casting ceremonies. And Audrey testified that she felt really uncomfortable about this. She didn't want to participate, and she told Lori that. And she said Lori was upset. They kind of went back and forth. And then Audrey, on her own, said that she said a prayer to God, saying, God, Heavenly Father, if something is wrong with Tammy, please help her. Please do something if something is wrong with her. Audrey was confused. She didn't want to do the casting stuff, but she said her own little prayer for Tammy that Tammy would get the help she needed if she was possessed. Fast forward a few weeks, and Lori and Melanie are in Hawaii, and Audrey decides to go meet them in Hawaii. She gets to Hawaii, and Lori says that Tammy Daybell has died. And Audrey's surprised and shocked by this. And she said that they rode bikes and they went to the beach and they just kind of hung out. She said Lori was acting really interesting and weird and really annoyed with Melanie Pawlowski, her niece, and her mood, that she'd be annoyed, but then she'd want to go swing and be really happy. And she said that there was just something was not quite right with Lori. And so Audrey wanted to go home. She wanted to leave Hawaii. And then Lori says, I'm going home. I'm going to Idaho, like today. So she booked a last-minute ticket. Well, Melanie wasn't ready to go home. So Audrey stayed with Melanie in Hawaii. And Lori took off. So Audrey's there with Melanie. And she said she was ready to be done with the friendship. She just was over it. She didn't feel right about it. But then she also felt bad. And so she ends up, instead of flying home to Missouri, she flies back to Idaho with Melanie to stay at Lori's house. Are you catching all this? There's a lot of names and a lot of travel. Ultimately, it was determined that Audrey hung out with with Lori in 5 states over the course of this year. And side note, someone leaned over to me and said, how are they getting all this money to travel? I don't know. Well, I might know, but we know how some of them were paying for travel, allegedly. I don't know how Audrey was paying for travel. So Audrey gets to Rexburg. She goes to stay with Lori, and they go to the temple. Audrey in Rexburg and Lori and Melanie. And the time comes for Audrey to go. And she says, she tells Lori, I'm about done with our friendship. And I'm going to play you the clip in just a moment. But I got to set the context for the court. So this was on her direct testimony from the prosecutors. Here's how it works. The prosecutor calls people as a witness. Let's say they call me as a witness. I go up. The prosecution asks me question after question after question. They're using me to build their case. When they are done, the defense has a chance to cross-examine me. The defense can only ask questions based on what the prosecution's asked me, based on what the testimony has already been. They can't introduce a bunch of new stuff. After that, the prosecution has another chance to do more redirect questions. Generally, that's short. It's clarifying a few things, whatnot. Today, we had the defense ask for another cross-exam, and they got it. So the defense questioned her twice. The prosecutor then wanted to question Audrey a 3rd time after the defense got up, but the judge said, we're done. I'm going to play you the exchange. It was probably the most fiery moment we have had in the trial thus far. The most memorable for sure. We went to a morning break right after the testimony. So the prosecutors asked their question. Jim Archibald gets up to cross-examine Audrey. He says, isn't it true that Chad told you that you were married to Jesus? You were Jesus's wife? And she says, yes. Isn't it true that Chad told you he was Methuselah and James the apostle? Yes. And that Lori was married to him and she was named Elena while he was named James? Yes. Isn't it true that Chad told you that he's lived for millions of years in different lives and portals and whatnot? And she said, yes. And he said, why did you believe this? It made you feel good, right? It made you feel good. Everybody wants to feel important. It made you feel cool. She said, yeah, it did. She moved to Missouri because that's where Jesus is going to return. Archibald asked her about that. You must be a really spiritual person. You must really believe all this stuff. You went to these conferences that weren't sanctioned by the LDS Church, but you still went and you participated. She said, yeah. He said, during all this time, you said you didn't feel that you were feeling something was wrong in your chest. When Tammy said that Charles was possessed by a demon, did you call the police? No. When Lori said, not Tammy. When Lori said Charles was, no. Did you call the police when you asked about Tylee? And Lori said, oh, Tylee doesn't talk to me much anymore. No. Did you call the police when they were talking about Tammy being possessed or being in trouble? No, never called the police. Well, why didn't you call the police? So Jim Archibald is trying to poke holes in her testimony to say, you're a nice person. You're a little naive, a little gullible. You can kind of tell, and she admitted that. Why didn't you do anything? Again, she said, I just didn't know what to do until it was, I guess, too late. So we've had the prosecutor's question. We've had the defense cross-examine. Now it's time for the prosecutors to kind of, I don't want to say clean things up, but tighten things up. couple minutes, finish it up, whatever. That's not what happened. They get up and they ask a simple question about how did yours and Lori's relationship fizzle. And Audrey goes on to say that Lori threatened to kill her and cut her up and bury her in a place no one could find her. I'm going to play you the exchange. It's about 7 or 8 minutes. I want to play through what happened when she shared about this experience and then what Jim Archibald did. And you can hear he is frustrated with her, that she's bringing this up at the very last minute, that it was never brought up during the grand jury when she was a witness, and that it was not brought up during the original examination. So this is Audrey Baratario on the stand today.
She died.
Yes.
Okay. And I think,
Well, I mean, they were working on their own doing those things.
yeah. I think defense counsel kind of asked you about this friendship and why you terminated it, and you said that you were scared or in fear. Why was that?
Because of a conversation.
And who was the conversation with?
Lori.
Did she make threats to you?
She did.
What did she say? What threats did she make to you?
Your Honor, I think this is outside.
She threatened
the
to
scope of
kill me.
arrest. I'd object.
Hold on just a minute. It came up on cross-examination, so it's within the scope of cross and proper redirect. Ms. Rawlings, you can re-ask the question.
What's the time and place of this conversation?
And I think, Audrey, you indicated this was when defense counsel asked you why you ended the friendship, and that was in what month?
In October 2019.
Okay.
Yes, I had already made plans to leave because I had prayed about it and it felt like I needed to leave and end the friendship. And I was leaving early the next morning. And Lori and I were the only ones in the hall in her place at the time. And I told her that I was going to go upstairs and pack my bag and just go to bed early because I didn't want to spend more time with her. And as I went to go and do that, I asked her the question, is there anything weird going on that I don't know about? And she said, no. What do you mean? And I said, I don't know anything. And she said, no. So I took her at her word because I'm a trusting person. And as soon as I turned to start to go up the stairs, she started laughing. The kind of laugh as if you're laughing at someone or think something's hilarious. And she said to me, you're so naive and too trusting. You're like a little child. You'll believe anything anyone would tell you. And she said, you think the world is all unicorns and rainbows. And you go around helping people and serving them. Well, I've got news for you. Not everyone's a good person. And not everyone can afford to be so nice and kind. And then she said that
So I want to just focus on what threats she made to you.
She threatened to kill me.
Okay. Did she say how?
Yes. She said that she would cut me up. And something about that she wasn't in the mental place to do that, but that she would get herself in that place to be able to do it. But that she didn't want to have to because it'd be so messy and there'd be so much blood. And the bleach and something about trash bags. And that she would bury me where no one would ever find me.
Okay. I don't think I have any other questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Rawlings.
Recall on that.
You may, Mr. Archibald.
So this diabolical conversation that you're having with Lori in October of 2019, was this in Idaho?
Yes.
You'd been with her previously in October of 2019 in Missouri, right?
Yes.
You'd been with Lori previously in October of 2019 in Hawaii, right?
Yes.
And then you followed Lori from Hawaii to Idaho in October of 2019, right?
Yes.
And then you decide it's time to go home to Missouri.
I'm sorry. I didn't follow her. I did not follow Lori.
Okay. You just happened to go from one state where you were vacationing with her to her place where she lived. But you're saying that's not follow.
Objection, argumentative.
That's sustained.
So this conversation in Idaho is before you go to the temple or after you go to the temple?
After.
And so you're saying she starts laughing and talks about unicorns and rainbows and that she would cut me up and put me in trash bags.
Something. Yes, she mentioned trash bags.
Why?
Objection calls for speculation.
Overruled.
Did she ever say, I killed my kids and I'm going to kill you too?
Objection beyond the scope.
Overruled.
No, I knew nothing about her children.
Right. Did she say, I killed Charles and I'll kill you too?
She didn't talk about Charles.
Nothing like that, right?
She brought up being at the scene, watching someone take their last breaths.
And you have previously testified under oath, swearing an oath that you'll tell the truth. You have previously testified at a grand jury hearing. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Do you remember taking an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Do you remember that?
Yes.
And do you remember your testimony that you did not say anything like this?
I was scared, and she had said that if you ever tell anyone, I'll come and find you in the dark of night.
So you now want the jury to believe that even though you previously testified under oath and nothing of this sort was talked about, that you come here today and say you are so scared, that's why you didn't previously testify about it.
Objection, Your Honor, argumentative.
It's overruled.
What was your question?
You want the jury to believe that you just didn't make this last crap up.
I did not make it up.
But you acknowledge that you did not say this when you previously testified in support of probable cause, right?
Yes. Chad
Okay.
and Lori.
Thank you.
Your Honor, can I just ask one?
All right. That's when Tanya Rawlings, the deputy prosecutor, said, "Can I ask one more question?" And the judge said no. So many questions I know. What was Lori's reaction? So many of you want to know. I was behind Lori. I couldn't see her face, but people on the other side of the courtroom told me that when Audrey started to talk about this threat, Lori leaned forward and stared at her. Just stared at her. And locked her eyes on her and didn't break her gaze. So what was the reaction after? Well, right after we went to a break, and I asked several people, we all leave the courtroom, we all hang out until they let us back in, just several spectators, what'd you think? And half the people said, I totally believe it. Totally believe her. Absolutely, she was scared. And then maybe two people said, I don't know. Why didn't she say that at the grand jury? Do you remember the grand jury was convened to decide if Lori and Chad should be charged? And Audrey was a witness there, and it was a closed hearing, and no one was in there except the grand jury and the prosecutors. And she did not bring this up at that testimony. And that's why Jim Archibald was so frustrated, saying, you've never mentioned this before, and you're saying it now? Now, she said, I was scared for my life. Lori threatened me. And that's a very real fear, not particularly in this situation, perhaps, but in other situations. I've interviewed people who have been threatened for their lives, and they just cannot, they're under a control of that threat. They just psychologically don't want to do anything because of that threat. And it could be that today, for the first time, Audrey came forward and said, she threatened to kill me, cut me up, put me somewhere I couldn't be found. She wasn't in the mental state. And some people have said, how would she know all those details? Like, the plastic bags and all that. How would she remember that? Well, people in traumatic moments, it's amazing what the mind can remember. Amazing what the mind can remember. So that was quite the testimony. Her testimony total was 2 hours today. And I just played you 8 minutes. The rest of it's on our YouTube channel. After we're done tonight, you can go listen to the whole thing. It was one of the most captivating testimonies we've heard. Someone that was very close with Lori, who has never spoken publicly. We've heard from Melanie Gibb publicly. Zulema's another one, but this woman was close with it, and this is the first person who's come forward and said, Lori threatened to kill me. So we'll see what happens with that. The jury was the jurors that I could see during this were pretty, I didn't see anybody's like jaw drop or any tears or anything, but they were focused. They were focused on the testimony. Audrey did cry quite a bit throughout her testimony, and she talked about the experiences. And what the defense will do, if you go back and listen, is Jim Archibald repeatedly tried to say, did you hear this from Chad or Lori? Tried to shift things over to Chad. And a lot of it did come from Chad, but some did come from Lori. And then the prosecution kind of said it to say, like, well, wait, you were in the hotel room with Lori. You were traveling with Lori. You went to Missouri. You were in Missouri with Lori. So this could be another one of those testimonies that sticks around for a while. What do you think, based on what you heard? Do you think that was legitimate story? I never want to question anybody's testimony. I hope you don't get me wrong, but I'm interested to hear your opinion. When just knowing what you know and what she said there, I'm interested to hear what you think. So she testified for about 2 hours. Then we heard from Detective Kayakumanu, Vince Kayakumanu, with the sheriff's office. He's been on the stand before, but this was a little bit different, his testimony today. It was a lot about Tammy's death. It was about what he found on Alex's computer search. Alex had searched for pornography. He had searched for, quote, trannies. And then he searched for guns, a lot of guns, on several dates leading up to the shooting at Tammy's driveway. Remember the shooting at Tammy's driveway. We knew what had happened that night so far based on 911 calls that she made and her son-in-law across the street made to police. And we knew what she posted on Facebook, a short blurb that, she had a weird experience in the driveway. Today we learned a little bit more, because she sent her son an email, her son who was on a mission. She sent him an email 4 or 5 days after the incident, and she wrote out what she said, what she said happened. I'm going to play that for you, and then halfway through it's going to cut. So the prosecution had the detective read the first half. The email was like 3 pages. So he read the second page. Then there were some theories that the defense had the detective read, that Tammy sent to her son. So she writes in the email, here's what happened, da 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 da. Then she says, Brother Price, Mr. Price, the neighbor, has a theory. And then she lists out the theories of who at the time they thought was the gunman. Because remember, they didn't know anything about Alex, Lori, none of that. Also remember, this is October 9th. The kids have been buried in her backyard. JJ for about 2 or 3 weeks. Tylee for a month. If she was killed October 8th or September 8th, 9th, this happened October 9th. So Tylee's remains have been in her yard for a month. This is the email that she sent, again, to her son Mark. And we'll talk about it after.
Now on the same day, I was coming home from clogging. It was about 9:15, and I backed into the front driveway. I was getting some items out of the back seat. We had made freezer meals at enrichment night, and my clogging shoes. I realized someone was by the back of the car. I looked up, thinking it was Dad or Garth to help me carry stuff in. Nope. It was a guy dressed in black with a ski mask on, pointing a rifle at me. I think I was a bit in shock because I just said, "What do you think you were doing?" Then I noticed a rifle was actually a paintball gun. It had a hopper on the top. The guy started pulling the trigger, and I could just hear the clicking of a whooshing sound of an empty paintball gun. He stayed standing by the back of the car, just pulling the trigger while pointing the gun at me. For some reason, I just kept asking him what he thought he was doing. At that point, I was actually more annoyed than scared, because he was standing between me and the door, and he didn't step towards me or even say anything. The scared part came after, when my brain thought of what things that could have happened. The thought crossed my mind to hit him with my clogging shoes, but first I looked towards the house and yelled, "Chad." The guy ran around the house, around the north side of the house. I ran in the house and got Dad and Garth. They looked outside, but we couldn't find him. We called the police and reported it. They suspect it was a bipolar teenager who lives down the street and walks around a lot. But Matt Price has an even better theory.
And I'll have you stop there.
Would you go ahead and read that paragraph for me?
His theory is that the crazy dog lady brought her husband back to steal the dog again. They had parked down the road, and he had snuck through the cow fields. He was going to cut through the front yard when I pulled up and startled him. He didn't know what to do, so he panicked and tried to menace me with the non-real gun, and then ran off across the field, which would explain why he ran to the north side of the house and why I never heard a car and we couldn't find anyone or him anywhere. It's actually a pretty good theory, and Matt is going to do some amateur sleuthing since the lady told Regan where she lives. I'll keep you posted if we ever figure anything else out.
Okay, so some background on that story here. Just one moment here. I'm going to fix this light here. The neighbor who lives near Chad said that morning of the shooting, someone came to steal her dog. And she chased the woman down the street. And so the theory was that the woman's husband returned that night to try to get the dog again or do something. That was one of the theories of the neighbors. And then Tammy spooked this guy and he went off running. The other theory was there was a quote, bipolar teenager down the street who it could have been. Well, the detective said that they investigated that and they never found the woman with the dog, and the kid down the street has autism, and they said it was far too long for him to walk to do that. It was also a very cold October day. I believe they said it was 23 degrees, and it was October. Well, they then search Alex's devices. They pull his Google search history and whatnot. And again, he's looked up a few things like 6.5 Grendel AR-15. Can you shoot through a Dodge Dakota? And Tammy was driving a Dodge Dakota. A bunch of other stuff about the distance you can shoot with a gun, one of these guns that he had, the Grendel AR gun. And it's actually kind of amazing to hear all of this and realize that Tammy was not shot in her driveway at that close of a range, at that big of an assault rifle. I'm going to show you the picture again. They actually brought the gun out in front of the jury, and they had Vince show it. You can see it. I mean, that covers most of that table. This is a big AR. And it looks like a paintball gun. And so what the prosecution did is they had Vince compare the features on this gun and what the modifications that had been done on this gun, such as adding, a silencer, I forget what they didn't call it a silencer, but very similar to a silencer, and a hopper, which are on paintball guns where you can like store your paintballs. And so that's why Tammy mentioned there was a hopper. That's why she thought it was a rifle at first, but then she realized it was a paintball gun. So Alex looked up how to shoot this gun. You know, how far does it shoot? Can it go through a Dodge Dakota door? In between his searches for porn. And then, also, does it shoot in cold weather? He looked up a few YouTube videos, and he basically did all this research before that night when he showed up in the driveway and fired it at Tammy. And there was like a whoosh, whoosh noise, something like that, and it didn't go off. Well, the defense got up and they said, well, anyone that would buy this type of gun, if you bought this type of gun, you'd go online and do Google searches, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you go online and Google how far it shot, the distance, and things like that? And I guess you would. Alex also visited a shooting range 7 or 8 times, maybe 6 times. He signed in using and this isn't new. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Quint. Alex was a huge Jaws fan, and Captain Quint is on Jaws. And he took this weapon most likely to the range, so he was practicing shooting it. But they never found a shell casing on the ground at Chad's house, probably because it never fired anything. And they never found, any solid evidence that Alex was out there. They did a radius test. That's not what you call it. What did they call it? Where they are able to take the I didn't write it down. It's in my notes from today if you go up. But basically, they were able to put a pinpoint in Chad's house and expand out a specific distance to see all of the cell phone activity and whatnot on the night Tammy died. And Chad's phone was not in the area, which was interesting. Alex's phone was at the church. We knew that. Chad's phone was not. So does that mean Chad wasn't home? Perhaps. Or his phone was off. And we know Alex's main phone was off that night because he bought the backup phone at Walmart the day before. So another interesting tidbit about the October 9th incident with the shooting in the driveway, the fact that Alex, had the gun, the AR gun, and then on the 19th that Chad's phone wasn't pinging. I forget what it was called. There's so many terms, and I hope that I'm making sense as I explain it all, because there's just so much. I really am just giving you kind of the highlights. For those of you that have come to sit in court, it's like every word, it's like, oh man, we could do a whole hour on this or a whole hour on that. And I haven't even got to the third witness yet. We're already 40 minutes into it. So I'll buzz through this last one. Ian Pawlowski. Ian is married to Melanie Pawlowski, not Gibb. A lot of people call her Melanice so that you can tell the difference. Melanie is Lori's niece, married Ian Pawlowski right after she got divorced from Brandon Boudreau, who was on the stand the first day. They married quickly, very quickly. I think they'd been dating a week or two. And on the night of their honeymoon, they were staying at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. And Ian's kids were there. And Melanie unloaded everything about these religious beliefs that her aunt and her husband now, Chad, Lori and Chad, her aunt and uncle, were espousing. And it was weird. And Ian didn't know what to think. The next morning, Ian's young kids were there. He said he couldn't find his daughter. And he was in a panic. For 15 minutes, his daughter was lost. And if you're a parent, you know that feeling. Let me find exactly what he said. I was going to play it, but again, the audio file that we got from the court today is a little messed up, so we don't have that testimony yet. We might not get it today. I'm hoping we'll get it tomorrow. So for those of you that really want to hear it, I'm sorry we don't have it. All right. So Ian said, well, I guess I can back up. There was a lot of question on if Ian should even be allowed to testify because they said that his wife, Melanie, watched previous testimony or read about the trial, which goes against it's called the exclusionary rule. If you're a witness in a trial, you're not allowed to watch other people's witness testimony because they'll say it will influence what you say. But they called Ian on the stand out of the presence of the jury, and he said he had not watched anything. He had seen a couple headlines, and that was it. And so they said he was fine to keep testifying. But tomorrow will be a new day with Melanie because he said Melanie did. All right, so Ian said, the point where it really turned for me was the morning after I married Melanie. Melanie dumped everything on me and shared everything about the religious beliefs. We were staying in the Bellagio in Las Vegas, and my 2 children were with me. I got up, and my daughter was gone. She was gone for about 15 minutes. She was nowhere. Finally, I hear some giggling behind the curtain. After hearing everything I had the night before, that was terrifying. At that point, I decided I wasn't going to give this a chance. I'm not going to mess with it. Ian was worried for his safety, the safety of his children, and his ex-wife's safety. On December 5th, less than a week after he married Melanie, Ian went to Rexburg Police. They asked him to listen and observe and report back and asked him to make recordings for them. I forget who it was that testified, but someone said today that Lori, I think it was Audrey, said that 2 of Melanie's kids had turned dark. And remember, Brandon really fought to keep those kids away from Melanie, moved to Utah and kind of took them into hiding. And if Lori was saying that the kids had turned dark, who knows what would have happened? And we don't know if those kids had life insurance policies on them. So Ian's freaked out, married to this new wife, goes to the police, agrees to wear a recording device to record anything that Chad and Lori might say about JJ and Tylee, because this is December 5th. The kids are missing, remember? The kids are gone. At this point, the police know it's not public yet. Brandon's been shot at, Tammy's dead, Charles is dead. They ask him where this, I'll call it a wire, I think it was a keychain, but wear this wire and try to see what you can record. He didn't get anything huge, according to his testimony and according to the police, but he still returned back to the PD and gave them the recording device. The prosecutors didn't play the recordings, but when they were done asking him questions, the defense said, Your Honor, we want to play the recordings. We don't have him here with us. We need to get him off a thumb drive. So at this point, it was 3:20. They said, why don't we retrieve those recordings and we'll play them first thing tomorrow. So that's what's happening tomorrow. We get to hear the recordings, what Ian recorded days after his wife told him all of this stuff. Jim Archibald often calls it crap. And it should be fascinating to hear what was on those recordings, what Chad and Lori were saying. And then After that's done, we will hear from Melanie Pawlowski. This is, of course, the niece that knew a lot, and it will be interesting to hear from her. So I hope I got through it all. I didn't get through it all, but I want to tell you a little thing that tomorrow is Tammy Daybell's birthday. And every night we try to remember the victims of this case. And so I want to read to you, if you have not checked out the Tammy Douglas Daybell Foundation, this was a foundation her family set up after Tammy died. She was a librarian, of course. She loved books and loved animals. And this foundation assists libraries and literacy programs in Utah and Idaho with books. And this is the post that they put up. You can see it here. Books are a window to the world, and we want to help open that window for every child. Join us in honoring Tammy Douglas Daybell's legacy by getting books into the hands of young readers. Tomorrow, May 4th, would have been Tammy's birthday. We have a lot of really fantastic things planned to honor it and can't wait to share with you. Let's work together to inspire a love of reading and improve child literacy. You can join us by donating on the website. The simplest way to make sure that we raise literate children is to teach them how to read and to show them that reading is a pleasurable activity. So if you want to help, you can go to the website. It's TammyDaybellFoundation.com, and you can donate with PayPal or send a check. You can use the hashtag #ReadWithMe, and that would be a way to remember Tammy and a way to help. They have a whole board. I interviewed the media director who's with this board. It's her cousin. Ben Douglas is her brother. Mike Douglas is her other brother. Samantha, we've interviewed, is a board member. And then there's a secretary, a media director, and a operation liaison. And then honorary members are Ron and Phyllis Douglas, Tammy's parents, who are right here. Wonderful people. And then there's some wonderful pictures of Tammy with her family and siblings. So tonight we remember Tammy and JJ and Tylee and Charles. Okay, here we go. You ready for your questions? Let's get to them. Number 1. Why did the defense want the podcast in the trial so desperately? I'm not sure I understand. We talked about this last night. Remember yesterday they played a podcast of Lori Vallow speaking at a house meeting or something where she talked about seeing Jesus and angels helping her and whatnot. The defense wanted it in there because the jury was able to hear Lori speak for uninterrupted 10 to 15 minutes. And you could see where Lori's brain was a year and a half ago, whenever that recording was made, before this happened. And if Lori had got on the stand and said all that stuff, the prosecutors could have questioned her back and said, wait, you've seen Jesus? You've seen Jesus? So it was able to give the jury a look at Lori's mind without any pushback. And I think that's why. That's just my speculation on it. They got that in, and now if Lori Daybell never takes the stand, the jury will remember that part. That's why they wanted the podcast in, and I think that's why the prosecution was so opposed to having it in. Does it really make a difference in the grand scheme of things? I don't know. I doubt that a verdict or a guilty or not guilty will come down to that podcast, but it still was an issue. And by the way, uploaded it to our YouTube if you want to hear it. Did Lori react at Audrey's testimony, especially when Audrey testified that Lori threatened to chop her into bits? I think I talked about that. She leaned forward, stared at her, was not happy. Yeah. Why, Jennifer said, why would the Gilberts even briefly consider helping Chad financially? That's an interesting question. You know, I don't know. I'd love to talk to them if they're watching. Chad and them, they were friends. I know that. Go back to February of 2020, if you can. Pre-COVID, kids are missing. We don't know where they're at. A lot of people think they're still alive. There's a lot of weird things happening, but no like incriminating things. It was right after I got back from Hawaii. Lori did not produce the kids in Rexburg, so she was arrested and flown back. Chad was still on the loose, spending the life insurance money, according to the police. I don't know if you all remember, but during that time, I was getting messages daily about where's Chad Daybell today. Many of you were sending me messages like Chad Daybell just bought a new car, a Cadillac, I think. Chad Daybell's at Costa Vida. Chad Daybell is here. So he goes to his neighbors. He wants to get his wife out of jail and says, hey, can you put up your property for bond? I have it on good authority that he asked many other people, including people in Utah, this same question. Couldn't come up with $1 million, and a bondsman in that particular case might say, this is too risky. I need it all up front. I need more than $100,000, which 10% is typically required. So I think that they thought about it, or maybe it was just one of those things where they're like caught off guard that he asked. So they said, well, we'll think about it and let you know tomorrow. But by the next day, Chad had called and said, oh, I have a bondsman who's going to call you a bondswoman. And they're like, whoa. And that's when Mrs. Gilbert said, Chad, where's Tylee? Doesn't she deserve a boyfriend, a life, a car? You told me Lori didn't have any kids, or didn't have any, that her kid died. Her daughter died. Where is she? And that's when Chad said, well, Tylee never liked me anyway, past tense. Next question from Myrna. Is it possible Melanie Pawlowski broke the exclusionary rule on purpose so she wouldn't have to testify? Again, the exclusionary rule is you can't listen to any witness testimony or read about the case if you are a witness. And they said today that Melanie did break the rule. We don't know the extent of that. We'll find out tomorrow when she testifies. Before she testifies, there'll be a little mini hearing out of the presence of the jury where they will talk about if she broke the rule, and they'll ask her what media she consumed and things like that. And if she's like, I've watched Courtroom Insider every night and I've listened to all the audio, she's off. If she says, no, I just read a few headlines here and there, they could probably keep her. I wouldn't know the intentions of her watching. Her husband did say today that the only thing that she looked up that he was aware of is after Brandon testified, they're involved in a nasty dispute for child custody. Ian said that Melanie went and looked up some headlines or some news about what he said or something. So we'll see. Did Lori really attend BYU? She was a hairdresser. Last time I checked, BYU didn't offer that specific instruction. I need to check on that. I had not heard that she attended BYU. So one of the witnesses said she did yesterday. Maybe Lori said that somewhere. But I need to check on that. Are JJ's biological parents at the trial? Diane asks. No, they're not. Unfortunately, I believe they've passed away. But JJ's grandparents are there. Monica, does Chad have to pay back life insurance because Tammy was murdered? Well, if he is found guilty of insurance fraud, he would. How he pays that back, I don't know. He will not be able to make any money off of a book deal or a documentary or anything like that. You cannot make money in Idaho. You cannot make money off of your crimes. So even if Lori wanted to write a book, she could write a book and publish it, I think, if someone would publish it, but she couldn't make any money. You can't profit off of crime. Okay, Becky, do you know if detectives used luminol inside of Chad's house and shed, or even Lori's, Melanie's, or Alex's garage? I don't know that. I haven't heard that. Glenn says, in the podcast, it was brought up at an exact end of times date was predicted by Chad. Obviously, we all didn't die on July 20th of 2020. Do you think prosecutors will bring this into the trial? I don't know if they'll bring this specific prophecy in, but someone else referenced in their testimony, I don't even remember who, or a recording, something about a date coming to pass where something major would happen, and it never did. So I think that kind of gave the jury a test. In the grand scheme of the deaths of all of these people, I guess somebody could come in and say, oh yeah, well, this was the date that she said the world would end, and so she thought she had to get rid of her kids by then, but I have not heard that. It'd be interesting if the defense brought that up. Can Melanie be held in contempt? She could. As far as the exclusionary rule, there are punishments attached. If you get a subpoena by the court, you are commanded to appear. And there can be conditions on there. And the conditions say, do not watch any of the testimony or trial or anything like that. If she did, Judge Boyce has said that I believe there's 4 consequences. 1, you could be held in contempt of court, serve jail time, or pay a fine. 2, your testimony could be stricken. I forget what the other 2 are. So we'll find out tomorrow if he'll let in the testimony what she consumed as far as media-wise, and if there's anything more to that. So tomorrow, we'll talk about that tomorrow night. But if you want to follow throughout the day, if you go to eastidahonews.com, I will be posting updates. And let me show you, for those of you, I still know that there are people who are just learning about the trial. I went to get a haircut this afternoon, and the guy cutting my hair, if you're watching, hey, he told me he would watch tonight. He said that he had only heard about this just a few days ago. And so he was new to it. But this is kind of how the format looks. If you go to East Idaho News, you'll see it says the day, live updates. And then, like, here's the sketches that I show you every night. But you can see 321. Boyce says the defense, here we go, I'll zoom in. Thomas says his cross-examination was focused on recordings Ian did for law enforcement because they weren't played. He wants them retrieved so he can hear them. Blake asked for a sidebar, 315. So that's all here, and I'm posting them, and all you have to do is go up here and hit refresh for updates, and then you'll get the latest news on the trial. You can also follow on Twitter, but I know a lot of you are not on Twitter, so this is the easiest thing to do. If you go there, that's where you'll find the written updates. Over here is the digest, which is basically our nightly newsletter you can get every night, where I break down the case. Audio, frequently asked questions, the timeline from the case, who's who, and all of our videos from the case. And then here's all the previous stories we've done. So if you want to see Courtroom Insider from the past, there we go. You just click that. Hope that makes sense. We want you to be able to find everything you want about this trial and more. And I'll be here. Now I have to say one more thing. Yesterday I showed you the wonderful gift that Rebecca brought me, some Smarties. A woman from Canada, and I'm sorry I didn't even get your name. We were in line at the security check-in today at the courthouse. She's pulled open her backpack. She said, I'm driving down from Canada. I stopped here to see the trial, and I brought you real Smarties. The chocolate ones that are from Canada. I've actually had these in Australia. She's like, these are the real Smarties. You don't need those other ones. So maybe by the time the trial's over, here's the other ones. I'll have a huge collection of Smarties. My kids will be so happy, and so will I. So thank you for the Smarties. If you want to follow me along, there's many places you can do that. There's my Facebook. If you send a request to my personal page and I don't know you, I won't accept it. I love you, but I won't accept it. I don't use my personal page for much other than people I actually have physically met and know. There's my Twitter, Nate News Now. There's my Insta. That's more family, personal stuff. And there is my YouTube. And tomorrow we post a new 7 questions with Emmy. And she's got a great interview with a girl named Lucy, who started a project called Lucy's Love Blankets, where she sends them to kids who are sick or who have cancer or just need a pick-me-up. It was a really fun interview. It's fun for Emmy to interview kids. And then we have another fun one coming up. If you've ever heard of Dog the Bounty Hunter. Yeah, she's talking with him. Little plug for my daughter. All right, thank you all for being here. I'll be back tomorrow night, day 22 tomorrow night. I think we're going to I think we're wrapping up. I think we're getting toward the end. We're not there yet, but we'll be here probably at least another week or so. So I hope you'll stay tuned. I really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you tomorrow night. Have a great, great night.